In 6th place, in original oratory, from Glenbard West, Maggie Nannenhorn. In 5th place, from Downers Grove North, Sarah Batchu. In 4th place, from Naperville Central, Mira Nathan. In 3rd place, from Wheaton North, Philip McClure. Your tournament runner-up in original oratory, Jenna Pouch from Moline High School. And in 1st place, your tournament champion for 2012 in original oratory from York High School, Sarah King.
Just finished cleaning up your room. Let's see that dust out with that broom. Get all that garbage out of sight, or you don't go out.
So I stumbled across this article in the newspaper the other day entitled, "Boy Wears Skirt to School in Protest Against Discrimination." Intrigued, I read further. Turns out, this 12-year-old boy named Chris Foley was protesting the fact that at his school, boys aren't allowed to wear shorts to school during the warmer months of the year. They have to wear long pants all year, but girls are allowed to wear knee-length skirts. Now, Chris didn't think this was fair because the long pants made the boys too warm and made it hard for them to concentrate. And the shorts he wanted to wear weren't any shorter than any of the girls' skirts. Chris felt that this discriminated against boys, and so he vowed that until the ban on shorts was overturned, he would wear his sister's skirt to school instead. Now, mostly this article made me laugh, but it also got me thinking about students' First Amendment rights. And while the First Amendment doesn't say anything about the rights of boys to wear skirts, it does say that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Although Chris probably didn't realize it, his skirt was a perfect example of something called symbolic speech protest. Now, throughout history, we see examples of these kinds of nonverbal speech protests in the forms of flag waving, flag burning, or the wearing of protest buttons or armbands. History also shows us how these protests can be a problem when mixed with education. So today we'll talk about what a student's right to symbolic speech protest is, the potentially negative effect of this kind of speech in a classroom, and how we can find a good balance between symbolic speech and education. But before we start, it's important to have a basic understanding of what symbolic speech is and when it really became a tool for students to use in protest. And to do that, we have to go all the way back to 1969. See, in 1969, 3 students, Mary Beth Tinker, her brother John, and their friend Christopher Eckert, decided to wear black armbands to school to protest the Vietnam War. They felt this was within their rights, but the school didn't, and so they all ended up battling it out in the Supreme Court. Now, the Tinkers won the case, and in doing so, won for students the right to protest symbolically in school. Symbolic speech protest is defined by the legal dictionary databases as using actions or gestures non-verbally as a way of communicating a message. The Tinkers were some of the first to introduce this idea of nonverbal speech protest into the American educational system, but today, more than 40 years later, students are hooked. For example, on October 16th, students wear red armbands and a piece of duct tape with the word life written on it to participate in a pro-life day of silent solidarity. And on April 5th, students go barefoot to raise awareness for kids in Africa that don't have shoes. Now, both of these are examples of national days when students use their First Amendment rights to raise awareness for a seemingly controversial issue that they're passionate about. Well, actually, I don't think there's anything controversial about helping kids in Africa get shoes. But the point stands. Whether they're wearing red, have life tape on, or staying silent, students are taking their campaigns with them into the classroom. Now, the problem with that is when, like the Tinkers, these symbolic speech protests become a distraction to theirs or other students' academic educations. In her book, Free Speech for Students, author Susan Dudley Gold quotes In her book, Free Speech for Students, author Susan Dudley Gold writes, The court allows students the right to symbolic speech within schools, but only as long as their actions do not disrupt classes. What she means is that while you have the right to free speech, symbolic speech protest has no place in the classroom if it distracts from learning opportunities. But wait, what's the big deal? So you wear a red armband, a black armband, a piece of life tape, no shoes. I mean, it's not really going to become a distraction in the classroom, is it? Well, history shows us that it does. In his book, The Courage of Their Convictions, author Peter Irons quotes Supreme Court Justice Stevenson of Tinker versus Des Moines as saying, while the armbands themselves may not be disruptive, they would be likely to disturb the disciplined atmosphere required for any classroom. And he was right. By wearing a 2-inch thick piece of black cloth on his arm, Christopher Eckert was abused, verbally and physically, by his fellow students, his teachers, and his coaches. Mary Beth received many death threats, and she, John, and Christopher were suspended for 2 weeks. And, well, I'm not gonna lie to you, missing 2 weeks of school sounds awesome right now. But it was distracting to their learning, and as the Center for Public Education so lovingly reminds us, that's what school is all about. Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black agreed with Justice Stevenson and wrote, "I have never believed that any young person has the right to engage in demonstrations wherever he pleases and whenever he pleases. Students should not use the schools at their whim as a platform." What he's saying is that public learning institutions require peaceful environments to thrive. So when they stop being peaceful, problems ensue. For example, in 2002, 18-year-old Frederick Morse unveiled a sign at a school-sponsored event that read, "Bong hits for Jesus." You can laugh, it's funny. The school didn't really think it was funny, though, and they ended up in the Supreme Court, just like the Tinkers. Unlike the Tinkers, though, Frederick lost the case, and he didn't understand why. Although I think I do. See, symbolic speech protesters like the Tinkers tried to lay a good foundation, but then generations of students, like Frederick Morse, sprung up, who believe that because they have the right to free speech, they can say and do whatever they want and they won't get in trouble. And that's a problem. Overwhelmingly, in their desire to participate in a symbolic speech protest, students forget what the true purpose of school is. So, if that true purpose of school is to get an education, and symbolic speech protest generally distracts from that, where is it more appropriate for a student to raise awareness for issues that they're passionate about? Benjamin Franklin once said, "Education and awareness are key to overcoming ignorance." So let's start there. Let's get educated about controversial issues, because once you have a solid understanding of your platform on an issue, you can seek to understand the other side. And once you do that, you can go out and have conversations with people where both sides are equally trying to understand each other. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Excuse me, I spend 8 or more hours in school every single day. If I'm gonna raise awareness for something and really get people talking, it's gonna be there. And I understand that, but think about it for a second. You have to go to school, right? You're forced to be there. So how much more of an impact would it make if you did your protest on your own free time, before or after school or on the weekend, as opposed to just getting out of class? Now, a way to do that would be to write a letter to your senator, hand out pamphlets in the downtown area of your town, or just start a Facebook group about it. If that's still not enough, you can do a protest, but do it where it'll have the greatest impact, which is very often not at school. For example, if you're pro-life and you want to do a silent protest, then do it. But do it somewhere like outside of Planned Parenthood. Schools don't have the power to change the law, but the court does. So take your protest and your passion to the people who have the power to do something about it. In the end, Chris Foley was allowed to wear his skirt to school because the uniform policy didn't say that he couldn't. But just because he could wear a skirt to school didn't necessarily mean that he should. Although the Tinkers were brave, their speech protest led to generations of students, like Frederick Morse, who abused the right to symbolic speech protest in school. We as students must remember that school is a place to learn and get an education, not to be a platform for protests and campaigns. So the key to finding the true balance between symbolic speech and education is to separate the two and raise awareness for controversial issues outside of school, lest you disturb the disciplined atmosphere required for any classroom. In the words of Voltaire, "I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." You have the right to say almost anything you want. So the question is, where will your speech have the greatest impact?